Join me today as I dive into Kumasagi Part 1, Destin, a fantastical reading experience unlike pretty much anything I've read before. Welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, the show where we talk about fantasy, science fiction, horror, and other nerdy things that my son and I enjoy. I hope you'll enjoy this episode, and if you do, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. All right, let's be honest here. It's really hard to come up with a fantasy story that's completely fresh and new. We've got so much out there now. Just about anything someone could think of, somebody else has already done. Then Leslie Shue comes along and scoffs at that concept as she rolls out the world of the Kumasagi series. 4 books to tell one complete tale. Leslie invited me to read her novel, hoping for an honest review, and I'm here today to deliver on that, and happily so, because what Leslie has created is really something unique and special. And ever since I finished that first book, my mind keeps going back to the events of the story and the world that she's built, and I kind of want to know more. So we're talking about Kumasagi Part 1, Destin by Leslie Shue. This was published back in 2020. The genre would be fantasy, perhaps epic fantasy. Mystical fantasy? I don't know if that's a thing, but it's definitely a fantasy novel. The setting, well, a great deal of this book was about establishing the setting, as this world is quite unique and different from any context you might previously have been familiar with. We're basically in a world that's semi aquatic, where many, if not most of the people, at least the ones we've met so far, have some symbiotic relationship with the water and actually have scales on parts of their bodies. Mostly they look human, but I mean, look at the background. You can see in the picture, there's scales. There's some slight differences here that lean into that aquatic tie. Many of them have webbed fingers and toes to help with swimming, and swimming plays a huge role in this society. Most of the living centers, as far as I can tell so far, are alongside lakes, and the cities themselves are riddled with canals, with waterways that people will use at times, certain people in particular, to travel because it's the fastest way to get from point A to point B. And in fact, one of the premier roles that someone can serve in these communities is called a diver. They are someone who trains to swim exceptionally well and plays a key role in one part of the life cycle of this society, which I'll talk about later. We spend all of our time in this novel at one location, Shakti Lake City. But we learn of a series of additional locations in this world, other lakes and cities, rivers, even some islands that I believe do come into play in the additional books. There's 3 more books to come in Kumasagi. The world appears semi-tropical. It seemed to be a pleasant enough temperature that, often the men are going around without a shirt. They don't need it. Makes it easy to be able to jump into the water. And the culture, it's got a very Southeast Asian flair to it, maybe even somewhat Chinese of a couple centuries ago. What's the book about? This appears to be primarily the story of 2 brothers, Najat and Jayan, and the woman Asta. The 2 brothers are unique in a number of ways. Firstly, it seems to be uncommon in this world for a couple to have more than one son. But here's 2 brothers. Secondly, both of these men are practically celebrities in this society, honored people. Jayan is a famed traveler and explorer, known for ranging far and wide to discover the world and bringing back the knowledge of his discoveries. This is not what people commonly do. So he's kind of like, famous. Najat is the premier diver of his time in Shakti Lake City. He's also the Kumasagi, which of course the book has the same name. That means he is the apprentice best word I can come up with, to the Mahasagi. Najat will be the next Mahasagi. Okay, here I need to explain some of the mysticism that the author has woven into this story. These people live in a land where there is the physical and the spiritual, and both are very real but separate things. In their lives, their kana, or soul, inhabits their physical body, but upon death, the kana does not die. The kana travels elsewhere in the spiritual realm, the spiritual plane. The kana moves on. The Mahasagi's role is to be at a person's side as they reach death, so that as their physical body passes away, the Mahasagi can be in the spiritual plane with them, can put themselves into the appropriate state to do this, and then psychically guide this person's kana onto the next plane, assisting in a peaceful passing. Apparently, without that help, the kana can become confused. I mean, you only die once. I've never done this before. And this confused kana can become lost, can even become trapped in horrible circumstances rather than peacefully making it to the next plane of existence. Now, this Mahasagi's job is not one that you apply for. In this world, they believe the Mahasagi is a being who is predestined, and in fact, is the same person through the centuries in some mystical way related to their kana. So while the current Mahasagi and Najat, his apprentice, the Kumasagi, are working together, they're actually seen as, okay, they're two different people, but they're the same person on a spiritual level. They share a kana, a soul. This is the belief they kind of have here. And that link between the two of them is, again, predestined. And when the Mahasagi leaves this temporal plane, part of his kana will reunite with Najat's kana as he elevates to the role of Mahasagi. I think that's how it works. Okay, this is deep stuff that the author has come up with and is trying to get across to us in this book. I think I got it. But I said the novel is also about a woman, Asta. So let's talk about that. And for this, I need to explain another really unique and unusual element of this world that relates specifically to women. I do not know or understand everything here. I believe more gets revealed in the later books. This book simply isn't far enough out for me to have everything right yet. So I'm gonna explain to the best of my ability right now. Essentially, in this culture, women come about in a different manner than men. I'm not so sure that's a different actual physical act to make women versus making men. But in some way, women have a different process whereby they are removed at birth and incubated to a greater level of maturity by some other means, so that they are then again born a second time as a fully mature woman. Again, I don't entirely know how this works, but some entity that moves about from village to village, from lake to lake, will stop by and deposit some new women who at that point are known as Destins. They are mostly a blank slate at that point. They will be acquired by the people of that city then and delivered to the city's nursery. Now, who acquires them? That's the divers. That's why it's such a critical role that you've got these guys who can swim super well and get out there really fast, scoop up these deposited women, bring them back to the boat, whereby they are set up with the nursery staff and with women who are known as amalas. The amala will commune on a psychic and mystic level with each of these destins to help them mature mentally, psychically, as well as with the help of other nursery staff, be trained in all the other aspects of life and culture, the arts, education, all the things that they need so that they will be ready, get this, to become a wife. There does not appear to be a childhood other than whatever's being done during that incubation phase. They They get into the nursery, they don't spend a long time there. They seem to be ready mentally to absorb a lot of information very quickly. And then, ta da! Okay, now brace yourself. The ta da part is now they're put up on display so men can purchase their wives. Now, don't get this confused with anything like slavery. These women are not being bought as the personal slave of the man. This is the vital role that the nursery plays in the society. It gets these women who need help at that point to become fully capable and knowledgeable human beings. Well, they're not human, they're something else, but you get the point. And fully prepare them for the world that's ahead of them and the role they play in this culture. The purchase price is basically how the nursery is funded in the society. The men will sometimes get into a bidding war. It's basically an auction for the women, but it's all understood this money then goes to support the work that was done to prepare these women for their role in the world. And the wives appear happy to join with a husband. This is their purpose. And these units of husband wife appear to thrive, supporting each other and playing their roles in the society. So don't judge it. That's just how it works in this fantasy culture. And it does. It seems to work, as far as I can tell through book one. Except when something goes wrong, which usually is not the case, but it can happen. Something can go awry. And something does go wrong here, which is the root of the problem of the story. Every good story, every good narrative needs a problem. And so that's where this starts out. On the day Asta is deposited into that lake, Najat was the diver who retrieved her. And something went very wrong on a psychic level that creates a link between Najat and Asta, something that never should have happened, and which will have long-lasting ramifications. And Jayan, Najat's brother, he's caught up in this too. How? Spoiler light, people. I can't tell you. You're gonna need to read the story to see for yourself. Let's talk about the plot's depth and complexity. There is a ton of complexity to this story. It's just embedded in this comprehensive world building that Leslie Shue has invested in as the foundation of this narrative. It's almost too deep. But if you are the right sort of reader for this book, you're going to love getting immersed in this world and this story. I'll admit, I've got the other 3 books sitting on my shelf, and it may not be very long before I pick up the next one, which I would not have thought of a while back. I'll explain a little bit more about that later in this review. But now I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to know what's going to happen because I find myself invested and captivated both by the world and by the characters I've come to know. I should mention also, part of this flows from the prologue. It starts with a prologue where something pretty profound and shocking occurs, and then the rest of the story was a flashback. And I don't yet know how we get to what happens in the prologue. I can guess there's some pieces in place already, but I want to know all of it, I think. So for a rating for plot depth, I'll give it 4 stars. 4 out of 5. It's strong, but the amount of world building work that's done in this narrative did not allow the story to move very deep into the plot yet. What I've consumed is great, but I didn't yet get enough. And really, it's not written to be one set story. It's just the first 15 chapters. You're supposed to move on to book 2. As for characters, Shue has done a fine job creating relatable characters who interact in rational and logical ways with each other, and whose needs and wants make plenty of sense. There is nuance in seeing characters acting upon their goals and interests while being complex enough not to see anyone as the good guy, the bad guy. They're, again, nuanced. I appreciate the way the different groups of characters are well defined in the story, tied to the culture and their roles in it, from the divers and the Amalas, the university staff, and the explorers, all these different ways people function in this society, not to mention the Mahasagi and the Kumasagi. Very interesting character work. While the writing is primarily in third person, the author does give us a variety of POVs, writing from the perspective of Najat, Jayan, and Asta at various different times, and also at times from other secondary characters' perspectives. So, in this way, we get to see what makes all these characters tick, which helps us understand this world better and increases our engagement and even our empathy for the circumstances these characters find themselves in. Really, I found the character work to be strong, and I would rate this 5 out of 5. Let's talk about the writing style. Here's where there is a bit of an issue with the book. The author begins with a banger of a prologue, not bothering much with context, just throwing us in the deep end as we see a traumatic circumstance and situation, allowing us to absorb details of the world that are just fascinating while we address the tension of the moment. But then she moves on to chapter 1, the first of 15 chapters in this book, and they're all flashback. And they never get us to the point where we see the events of the prologue. That's coming later. Now, that's not unheard of, but the issue is the shift in pacing. The prologue was tense and swift, full of high stakes and energy, and then chapter 1 jarringly is not. Everything slows way down, returns to normality, and we begin meeting characters and getting a ton of world building accomplished, building up to a big event in chapter 3 that we only partially understand at that time, and after which we have many additional chapters that are slow and hard to understand due to the need for the author to do all this world building. She's dumping information into our head, so things are making more and more sense as we go, but the need to do that means the pacing of this book just plods for the whole first half. I had to force myself to keep reading. I'd find my mind wandering after just a few pages, so I do it in little chunks at a time, and honestly, it took me a long time to get through the first half of the book. But if you make it through, just past the halfway point, just past, there's enough foundation in place that the author felt she could pick up the pace a notch. It's obvious. I was able to read the second half of the book in just a few hours. One day. Quite enjoyed it. I was finally interested. My mind did not wander at all. I was glued to the page and just wanted to keep at it. The actual prose, the style of writing is quite nice, and there is a general beauty to the writing that's terrific when the pace is fast enough. But it's too much when the story moves too slow at the start, and that's why I couldn't stick with it. Also of note, I want to shout out Leslie Shue. I found no issues or errors in the writing at all. And even the big boy authors do that sometimes, where glitches fall through. Nothing here. Either Leslie is a stickler for care in her writing, or she has a fantastic editor. And perhaps both are true, but this was a flawless book. I'll give 3 of 5 for writing style due to the significant issue I have with pacing of the first half. But keep in mind, that means I'm rating this style of writing as average, despite my big issues with the pacing, because the quality of the actual writing balances out the weakness of the pacing for me. Themes? For this story, the themes are only hinted at because we didn't pick up into the action until about halfway through, and there's a lot more that's going to be developed as you go through the rest of Kumasagi. But I've got 3 that I think came out for me already. The first would be duty versus desire. As we see characters who know what they're supposed to do, what their duty is, while feeling conflicted because of what they really want to do. They want to do this, but that would be letting down the society, the people who count on them. That's the wrong thing per their culture. They can't do that. They need to do this. And that tension. And many people can empathize with that struggle. A second theme, which kind of plays into that, is forbidden love. We can already see at this point where the story is headed. In one aspect, there's going to be conflict and tension ongoing because of people who feel they're meant for each other, but know they cannot be with each other. That is just never going to work. And finally, identity and self-discovery. Much of this book is wrapped up in individuals exploring who they really are, what their purpose is, and striving to better determine their role in the world. Warnings for this book? My only warning here is something I've already pointed out. The culture and societal norms here are not what we are currently accustomed to in modern society in most places around the world. If you can't get past judging a book based on modern Western values, then you're going to struggle with this book. There is also the role that death plays in life that comes up multiple times in this narrative. I had no issue with that, but some people might find that uncomfortable. My rating and recommendation for you, I give the book as a whole 4 out of 5 stars. So it's a pretty strong read, despite my difficulty getting through the first half. I'll admit, I considered not finishing the book, but I'm really glad I pushed through. And so I'm here to tell you it's worth the push. The fact that I'm tempted to dive into book 2 sooner rather than later should tell you something. That's what I've got here for you. Have you read this book? Do you have thoughts on it? Put them down in the comments. I'd love to hear. And if you go on to try the book and make it through the slog of the beginning and into the second half, and you really, have a great experience with it, let me know. Or if you try it and you think I was off my rocker, I'll take that comment too. I just love when people engage, and I always reply. Thanks for watching. Again, don't forget to give us that like. We'll talk to you next time.